Hi, and thank you very much for taking the time to attend this talk today. I hope you will find the topic and the results interesting, and that the approach outlined here today will allow you to implement behaviour changes and social innovation in your research projects and groups by embracing the theme of this conference, Designing Sustainability for All. My name is Ronan Cooney, and I'm a final year PhD student at the College of Engineering and Informatics at the National University of Ireland, Galway. Primarily, my research is focused on the application of life cycle assessment and other life cycle techniques to Ireland's freshwater aquaculture sector, with a view to developing a biodiversity impact metric using the Water Framework Directive. This work is carried out under the supervision of Dr. Owen Clifford and the late Dr. Richard Fitzgerald. Alexander Tahar is a postdoctoral researcher with the Biosciences Research Institute at the Athlone Institute of Technology. The co-authors and I of this presentation are researchers on the Morefish and EcoAqua projects. These projects aim to enhance production and sustainability of the Irish freshwater aquaculture sector. Aquaculture, almost by its nature, occurs in remote locations and is generally isolated from research institutions and centres. It is against this background that the concept of today's presentation manifested. The outline of the talk is as follows. The first part of the talk will cover the introduction, that is the background to the study and the context. The second will be the materials and methods, that is the life cycle thinking approach that was utilised, the results of the study, the discussion of the results, and the study in general, and finally the conclusions, recommendations we have derived from the study. As the concept of sustainability and the idea of doing more with less has grown in the public zeitgeist, we must look to its origins. The growth in the use of the word sustainability appears to have originated in academia and research publications. Since the 1970s, scientific publications concerning sustainability have increased from one article to over 11,000 in 2016. As with all activities, the research behind these publications has had an impact on the environment in that the data gathered to support these articles required the use of vehicles and resources. As researchers into sustainability in our respective fields, we have an onus to account for our own impacts as part of our work and, where possible, implement adequate interventions. For example, if a delegate such as myself was to travel from Ireland to this conference venue today, it would have been necessary for me to travel 3,400 kilometres. In total, I would have emitted 424 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. 86% of this CO2 emissions and 83% of the distance would have been comprised of air travel. By producing this video and it being broadcast in 5 different locations, we have avoided these emissions and the resources, and we have also increased the dissemination potential of this work. A concept which can help promote environmentally responsible practices within research groups is that of life cycle thinking. Life cycle thinking is a philosophy which can allow practitioners to make informed choices and decisions by looking at the life cycle of a product, practice, or organisation. The typical life cycle of a product can be seen here to the left. It includes the resource extraction, production, processing, the use, and the end-of-life scenarios such as disposal or recycling. Within life cycle thinking, there are a number of different approaches as to how this philosophy can be implemented. Some of these approaches include environmental life cycle assessment, social LCA, life cycle management, life cycle sustainability assessment, and organizational LCA. In all of these approaches of life cycle thinking, the function of the studied system, object, or product is the central aspect and is often termed the functional unit. The benefits of a life cycle approach to consumers, companies, and researchers are that it can identify impact reduction opportunities otherwise not readily identifiable and can help augment a modal shift from a conventional product or process to an emerging alternative. When it comes to the life cycle of a research project, similarly to a product life cycle, there are a number of phases which must be quantified and assessed. This can be seen here to the image on the left. Within the suite of life cycle thinking techniques and approaches, organizational LCA is the most appropriate for estimating the environmental burden of a research project. OLCA provides a framework which allows for the quantification of environmental impacts and burdens associated with organizations, whereby the underlying principles and approach of a process-based LCA are applied to the organization or group being studied. The goal and scope of this must be defined, the study must build an inventory, a life cycle impact assessment must be carried out, and the results must be interpreted. The difference between these two techniques occur in 3 areas. Number 1, the object being studied is an organisation and not a good or a service, and is termed the reporting organisation. 2, the unit of analysis is referred to as the reporting unit rather than the functional unit. And 3, the system boundaries encompass all the activities of the organisation rather than focusing on a production system. The goal of this study was to determine the environmental burden associated with research, investigate impact reduction opportunities, and investigate the use of OLCA as a project management tool. The reporting organisation was the Moorfish Project. The system boundaries for the study accounted for travel activities which occurred within the project's reference period. The reporting flow of the study was defined on a temporal scale, that is the project duration, so the 1st of January 2015 to the 31st of August 2017. Travel was broken down into the mode of transport used, so road, air, bus and rail. These were further classified as commuting activities, fieldwork activities, conferences and meeting activities. These categories were then assessed on tailpipe emissions by analysing carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and particulate matter, as well as fuel consumption. The inventory for this study was created using a mix of proprietary data, public reports and life cycle assessment databases. Proprietary data was gathered using personnel questionnaires, travel and expenses claims. The LCIA of the study was conducted using the CML 2001 baseline characterization factors. 4 scenarios in total were considered. These scenarios were conducted to investigate the impact reduction opportunities which could have been implemented. Scenario 1 represents the estimated actual impact associated with the project. Scenario 2 outlines the associated impacts of the project if it were to occur using electric vehicles. Scenario 3 investigates the reduction potential associated with having personal work from home 1 day per week, negating the need to commute to work on that day. And Scenario 4 considers a very real impact opportunity which could have been applied throughout the project life cycle, which was to encourage stakeholders to arrive at workshops and events using public transportation. For Scenario 1, the total distance travelled to achieve the project's aims amounted to 143,000 kilometres. That is a distance great enough to travel around the world 3.6 times, or almost 40% of the way to the moon. Fuel use for the project totaled almost 6,000 litres, with tailpipe carbon emissions being 14 tonnes. The results of this reference scenario indicated the bulk of the project's burden were associated with commuting activity, which had an average of 42% of the total burden across all impact categories. This was followed by conferences and training at 32%, fieldwork at 16%, and meetings at 10%. We can see here the influence air travel has on the human toxicity potential of these activities. Air travel accounted for 0.4% of total travel events, but yet was responsible for 19% of distance travelled and 22% of CO2 emissions. In the electric vehicle scenario, there was an average reduction of 16% of the total impact across all categories. When compared with the reference, commuting was displaced by conference and training, which increased its impact to 41%. Fieldwork averaged 12%, with meetings representing 11%. This shift in contribution impacts was due to the reduction in car-related use as a result of reduced fossil fuels, their consumption and their production. The use of air travel in conference and training activities became the major contributor as a result, and areas which saw an increase were the toxicity categories due to an increased use. So everything above the dotted line in this graph here indicates impacts greater than in the reference scenario. The third scenario investigated if project personnel were offered flexible working arrangements. That is, that they were afforded the opportunity of working from home at least 1 day per week. Across all impact categories, there was an average reduction of 5%. The rank structure was not affected in this scenario, but there were increases in all other activities apart from commuting. Commuting had an average of 39% of total impacts, conferences and training at 33%, fieldwork at 17%, and meetings at 11%. The fourth scenario considered as part of this case study was that of a stakeholder intervention, where delegates and attendees at project organised workshops were encouraged to use public transportation instead of using private vehicles. The results of the scenario indicated that in terms of environmental burden and the time required to travel to the workshops, that public transportation was not the most environmentally informed choice. For the first workshop, there was an average decrease of 49% in the total impact. The second workshop saw an increase in attendance, and these individuals came from further afield and included attendees from overseas. As a result of this, the alternative for this workshop saw an increase in the environmental burden across all impact categories of 140% compared to the reference. The third workshop in this series saw an increase of 304% across the impact categories and an increase of 106 hours travel time compared to the reference. The results of this scenario reflect the nature of the Irish aquaculture sector in that it occurs in rural areas away from major urban areas, with well-developed public transportation routes. The results of this study give an indication of the environmental burden associated with research. The inclusion of commuting as part of this analysis can be somewhat controversial, but it can be justified based on the fact that 1. The actions of the individuals employed only occurred due to their involvement with this project, and 2. Commuting is a major contributor to the overall burden associated with each individual's footprint within a project, and by allowing personnel to observe the impact reduction opportunities available to them, that they could in turn make a more informed choice as to how they can incorporate life cycle thinking into their daily working and personal lives. Beyond the general remit of a project management point of view, it remains that as researchers and participants in a project looking at promoting and developing sustainable practices, that we should inform ourselves as to what our impact is and potentially select more efficient means of transportation for work. The shift to electric vehicles from traditional internal combustion engine vehicles offers very real impact reduction opportunities by using currently available models. Organisations can mandate that for suitable trips, in-house EVs must be used whenever and wherever possible. Utility vehicles such as 4x4s and vans are ideal candidates for this. In this project, we travelled over 7,000 kilometres and emitted 3,000 kilos of CO2 by using utility vehicles. By switching to the closest alternative commercial models available, there would be an average reduction of 85% in tailpipe CO2 emissions. With regards to event organisation and stakeholder engagement, the results were very intriguing. In the context of this project, the alternative scenarios considered represented the nature of the aquaculture industry in Ireland. That is, that they occur in rural areas not readily serviced by adequate public transportation. A way of reducing the impact of this scenario may be to arrange regional meetings, or as in the instance of today, remote meetings. Most research projects are also financed through public funding. As such, there is a social responsibility for researchers and projects working on and researching the areas of sustainability and efficiency to conduct their work using the most environmentally sustainable and efficient means possible. The introspective approach outlined in this study allows for an initial post hoc approach to incorporate the concept of life cycle thinking and its application to a research project and management using relatively simple and readily available information. Simple emissions audits should be carried out to monitor and reduce research-related impacts going forward. The extent to which a research project can implement significant changes in its operation is somewhat limited, as they are generally a smaller collective in a larger organisation. Research groups will generally not be in a position to purchase vehicles or other means of transportation from research budgets, but can approach funding organisations and their own institutes with recommendations to phase the organisation's vehicle fleet with the most environmentally conscious option when upgrading. Furthermore, an organisational LCA should, as a matter of course, be implemented at third-level institutions along the lines of the most recent literature. These institutions house and promote the research of sustainability and its application to the wider world, and we must practice what we preach. In conclusion, applying an organisational LCA approach proved to be an appropriate tool for assessing the environmental burden of a research group, and it has the potential to better inform the management of academic projects and events. It is recommended that principal investigators, organisations and funding bodies incorporate an OLCA approach into their practices to foster responsible and sustainable research practices. Thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy the conference.